everybody, Andrew here with Get Together Gardening, and today we're going to talk about how to harvest, cure, and store onions. We're also going to talk about some of the things that went wrong for me this year and what I'm going to do next year to make sure that it doesn't happen again. The best way to tell if your onions are ready to harvest is by looking at their leaves. A majority of the onions in your bed, the leaves should be flopped over, and if you give the necks a pinch, it should be soft and a little squishy. It was a little difficult for me to see my red onions because of the weeds, but more on that later. If you notice, it still looks like I have a lot of yellow onion leaves sticking up, and that's because I had to pull them because there was rain in the forecast. Just like potatoes, you want to stop watering your crops about 2 weeks before they're ready to harvest, and if there's rain in the forecast, you want to make sure you get them out of the ground because it'll make curing easier. To harvest them, it's as simple as pulling the onion from the ground, being careful not to separate the leaves from the bulb. Then you can just brush off some of the dirt with your hand. For curing, it's very similar to potatoes. Put your onions in an area away from the sun and let them sit for 2 weeks. This could be an area like a garage, shed, porch, or basement. It's a little more critical to dry onions compared to potatoes, so if you're curing them indoors, it's really helpful to use a box fan or an oscillating fan to help promote more airflow to help them dry out better. The goal is to get an outer skin that's almost like paper, and you want the leaves to turn brown and almost sort of crispy. If your onions don't dry properly, they're gonna turn into mush and they smell really bad. Because I had to pull some of my onions early, they're not ideal candidates for storage, so what I'm going to do with them is clean them up, chop them to my desired texture, and then put them in a freezer bag and freeze them. Because they're so small, I personally don't feel like it's worth the time or the space to try to cure them with the rest of the onions, so this is what I'm going to do. After they dry, my favorite way to store them is to trim their roots to about 1/4 inch, get them in bunches of 5, and tie them up by their leaves. And then I'll take the bunches and I'll hang them up. You want to keep them in a similar condition as you would a potato, so cool and dry. And I also might do what I suggested in my potato video. As the temperature outside gets colder, I might move them to my outdoor shed or my garage to help them maintain these colder temperatures to stop them from spoiling. Despite having similar curing and storing methods, you don't want to store your onions and potatoes together because onions actually put off ethylene gas, and that gas can cause your potatoes to over-ripen and eventually rot away. Like I said before, I had a little bit of difficulty with my onions this year, and it was nothing compared to what I was able to produce last year. Probably about 98% of them died after I planted them, so there's some things that I can do next year to make sure my harvest is better. One of the main reasons my onions were so small this year was because I had to replant them, so that already put me behind schedule. There were both things that I could and couldn't control that affected my onion crop this year. One of the things that I couldn't really control was the amount of rain that we got. Shortly after I planted them, we had about 2 weeks of just straight rain, and I think that was one of the main causes for their death because the onions just couldn't handle it all. They got super soggy and just withered away. So what I might do next year is if the weather is calling for that much rain, I might want to consider putting like a cover over them, something to help them keep a little bit of moisture but not get soaked. One thing that I could control is the amount of fertilizer I put in the beds. This year I used a different formula of fertilizer and I was a little bit heavy-handed, and I think I paid the price for it. I think this was an issue for me because I looked at some of my other plants and they were struggling as well, and I used a similar fertilizing method. So I might want to cut back a little bit next year if I'm going to continue to use that same formula. Another thing that I struggled with that's kind of on me is weed control. So I did let some of my weeds grow between the onions. And the problem with that is when you let the weeds grow with the onions, they kind of compete for space and the weeds usually win. So your bulbs might not grow as big. What I'm going to do for this next year is I bought some raised garden beds, which is going to hopefully make it easier for me to keep up on picking the weeds. With that said, I'm still happy that I was able to grow something at all, and I hope that you learned something from watching this video. Make sure to get subscribed because even though summer is coming to an end, I still have some exciting things to share. Once again, thanks for watching and happy growing.
Minnie? Minnie?